The vote was already halfway done before I even understood what was happening. I was standing at the back of the grand chamber behind a railing meant for observers, staff, and other people who did not matter. The chamber itself was enormous, a bowl of dark crystal carved into the heart of the council citadel, rising tier after tier like the inside of a cathedral built for giants. 1,000 alien delegations filled those tiers, each one seated in a section designed for their specific biology. Some breathed nitrogen, some floated in magnetic suspension fields because gravity would crush them. Some were so large that their seats were really just open platforms reinforced with structural beams. The air smelled like ozone and something faintly sweet, which I had been told was the chemical signature of a translation field working at full capacity, converting 100 languages into meaning. My name is Grace Holloway. I am 36 years old. I'm a shipbuilding engineer by training, and as of 48 hours ago, the acting diplomatic representative of Earth to the Galactic Council. The reason I held that title was simple and terrible. Our actual ambassador, a man named Richard Crane who had served in the post for 11 years, had collapsed 2 days earlier from a brain hemorrhage. He was alive barely, in a medical pod on the human section of the Citadel. The doctors said he might recover. They also said he might not. There was no time to send a replacement from Earth. The journey took 9 days, even at maximum transit speed, so command fell to me, the junior attaché, the engineer who had been assigned to the diplomatic mission because someone in the Defense Ministry thought it would be useful to have a person on the Council station who understood how starships were put together. I had been here for 7 months. I had attended exactly 12 council sessions. I had spoken publicly exactly 0 times, and now I was watching the Galactic Council vote on whether to sell my entire species into slavery. The resolution was called 7719. It had a long official title that I will not repeat because it was designed to sound boring. That was the trick. The Draelith, the species that had proposed it, understood something fundamental about bureaucracy. If you want to do something monstrous, you wrap it in language so dull that nobody pays attention until the signatures are dry. The resolution referred to humanity as a provisional developing species. It described our reassignment to vassal status under the Draelith Economic Protectorate. It cited an unpaid development debt that Earth had supposedly accumulated over the 40 years since we first joined the galactic community. The numbers were so large, they stopped meaning anything. Trillions of galactic trade units, interest compounded annually, penalty clauses for late payment. The whole thing read like a mortgage contract written by someone who hated you. The meaning stripped of its careful language was this: every human colony, every human station, every human being would become the legal property of the Draelith hegemony. We would work, we would serve, we would not leave, we would not refuse, we would not vote because property does not vote. I had received the text of the resolution 6 hours before the session. I had read it 3 times. The first time, I did not believe it. The second time, I felt something cold settle into my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. The third time, I started making calls. The Draelith High Delegate, a creature named Vorath Sen, presented the resolution himself. He stood at the central podium, which was really more of a floating platform, surrounded by holographic displays. Voreth Sin was tall, even by Dralith standards, nearly 3'3" of pale gray skin, stretched over a frame that was more angular than any human skeleton. His eyes were black from edge to edge, like polished stones set into his face. He had 4 arms, the upper pair folded. Behind his back, in what I had learned, was a posture of formal authority. His voice was deep and resonant, and the translation field rendered it into English with a precision that somehow made it worse because every word was perfectly clear. He spoke for 40 minutes. He cited trade, law, he cited precedent, he cited the original uplift agreement that Earth had signed 4 decades ago when humanity first made contact with the Galactic community and accepted their offer of faster-than-light technology in exchange for future contributions to the collective economy. He read clauses. He read subclauses. He read amendments to subclauses. It was masterful in the way that a trap is masterful when you only see the mechanism after it has already closed. Around your leg, I listened to every word. I took notes. My hand was steady. I want you to know that because later people would say I was brave in that chamber, and I want to be honest, I was not brave. I was numb. Bravery requires feeling something and choosing to act despite it. I felt nothing in that moment. I was a recording device with a pulse. The feelings would come later in private, and they would be terrible, but right then, standing behind that railing, I was just a woman writing things down. The vote was called. In the Galactic Council, voting is visual. Each delegation has a light on their section of the tier. Green for yes, red for no, white for abstention. When the vote is called, the lights appear all at once, and the result is immediately visible, a wash of color spreading across the chamber like a sunset you did not want to see. Green. So much green. It spread across the tiers in a wave. Delegation after delegation lighting up in favor of Resolution 7719. I counted without meaning to. It is a habit from engineering. The instinct to quantify, to measure, to know the exact dimensions of the problem. 197 green lights, 98 red, 17 white. The resolution passed with a clear majority. It was not even close. I watched the red lights and tried to feel grateful for them. 98 species had voted against selling humanity. Some of them were species I knew, species that had traded with us fairly, species whose ships we had built and maintained with pride. The Urani Collective, a federation of aquatic worlds, had voted no. The Pelvani, a quiet species of enormous patience and longer memory, had voted no. A handful of smaller nation species that understood what it meant to be small in a room full of giants had voted no. It was not enough. Across the chamber in the Urani section, I saw their delegate looking at me. His name was Talik Vey. He was shorter than most Urani, with the blue-green skin and wide dark eyes that made his species look perpetually startled. I had spoken with him twice at diplomatic functions, brief conversations about shipbuilding standards and cargo regulations. He had been kind, polite. He had treated me like a person rather than a representative of a furniture species. He was looking at me now with an Expression I recognized. It was the same expression I had seen on the faces of doctors delivering bad news. The mouth set tight, the eyes saying everything. The mouth would not. He raised one webbed hand slightly, and his lips moved. The distance was too great for me to hear him, but I could read the word. Sorry, I nodded. I did not smile. I did not cry. I placed my hands flat on the railing in front of me and pressed down until I could feel the cold metal against my palms, grounding myself. Something physical, something real. Something that was not the color green, spreading across a chamber like a bruise. Then I pressed my earpiece and opened a private encrypted channel to Earth. It is done. I said. They passed it. The response took 4 seconds to arrive. Light speed delay plus encryption. Processing. 4 seconds of silence that felt like 4 years. The voice that answered belonged to General Nathan Cole, head of Earth's Joint Defense Initiative. I had spoken to him 3 times in my life. He was not a man who wasted words or expressed emotions that did not serve a tactical purpose. He was 61 years old, a former naval engineer who had transitioned to strategic command, and his voice had the flat calm of a person who had already planned for every possible version of this moment. Good, he said. Now we can stop pretending. I closed my eyes for 1 second, 1 single second, then I opened them. And I smiled. Not a large smile, not a performance. Just the smallest shift at the corners of my mouth, a private expression that no one in the chamber would have noticed or understood. It was the smile of a woman who had just heard the one sentence she had been waiting to hear for 6 hours. No, that is not right. It was the smile of a woman whose species had been waiting to hear that sentence for 40 years. The session concluded with the usual formalities. Vorith Sin delivered a brief closing statement in which he expressed the Dralith hegemony's gratitude for the Council's wisdom and its commitment to fiscal responsibility. He said that the transition of Earth and its colonies to vassal status would proceed in an orderly and humane fashion. He actually used that word, humane. The translation field rendered it with perfect clarity, and I stood there behind my railing and listened to a creature with 4 arms and no concept of mercy use a human word to describe the process of coloning us. The delegations began to file out. The Dralith left first, as was their custom, a procession of gray figures, moving with the precise choreography of a species that had been practicing authority for 10,000 years. Other delegations followed in order of seniority, the newer species, the smaller ones, the ones who had no real power, left last. We were among them. I walked back to the human delegations' quarters, which occupied a small section on the lower ring of the citadel. It was modest by any standard. 3 offices, a common room, a communication suite, and sleeping quarters for a staff of 9. We were the smallest delegation on the station. Some species had entire floors. The Dralith had an entire wing. Our staff was waiting for me, 8 faces, all of them tight with the knowledge of what had just happened. Lucy Trent, our communications officer, had tears on her cheeks, but her jaw was set and her hands were already moving across her console. Daniel Perry, our legal advisor, was standing by the window staring out at the stars with the expression of a man doing very difficult math in his head. Simon Hart, our logistics coordinator, was sitting at the main table with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on me, with a look I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror that morning. It was the look of someone who was done being afraid and had moved on to something else entirely. "You all heard," I said. They nodded. "Good, then you know what comes next. We have been preparing for this possibility since before any of us were born. This is not a surprise. This is not a disaster. This is the scenario we trained for. Every single one of you knows your role. I need you to execute it exactly as planned, exactly on schedule, with zero deviation. Can you do that?" 8 voices, one word, "Yes." "Then let us begin." I sat down at the head of the table and pulled up my encrypted files, the ones I had carried with me from Earth, the ones that had been loaded onto my personal data pad by General Cole himself before I left for the Citadel 7 months ago. At the time, he had told me that I would probably never need to open them. He had said it the way a person talks about a fire extinguisher. You keep it close, you hope the building never burns, but if it does, you do not hesitate. The building was burning. I opened the files. The first one was labeled simply Phase 1. It contained a set of instructions, a communication protocol, and a single authorization code that, once transmitted, could not be recalled. I read through the instructions twice, not because I needed to refresh my memory, but because I wanted to make absolutely certain that I understood every word, every implication, every consequence. Then I looked up at my team. "Get me a line to the Helios shipyards," I said. "Priority channel, full encryption, and someone get me a cup of coffee because we are going to be here for a while." Simon almost laughed. "Almost coffee," he said. "The Galaxy just voted to own us. And you want coffee?" "The Galaxy," I said, "has made a very serious mistake. And I think better with caffeine." That got a small, grim smile from everyone in the room. It was not much, but it was enough. I turned to my console and began typing. The first message: "The Galactic Council thought they had just bought humanity. They had not. They had just woken it up. And they had absolutely no idea what that meant. I need to tell you something about the 40 years before that vote. Because if you do not understand what happened during those 4 decades, you will not understand why I smiled in that chamber. And you will not understand what came next. When humanity first encountered the galactic community, we were exactly what they expected us to be. Small, young, dangerous in the way that children are dangerous, capable of hurting ourselves, but not much else. Our fastest ships crawled between stars at a fraction of light speed. Our most advanced weapons were nuclear, which the Council species regarded the way you might regard a child waving a sharp stick. Our greatest scientific achievement, by galactic standards, was that we had managed not to render our own planet uninhabitable, and even that was debatable depending on who you asked. The Council sent a contact delegation. The Vellery, one of the founding 14, handled first contact because they had done it 100 times before, and they were good at it. They were a beautiful species, tall and slender, with iridescent skin that shifted color with their moods, and they had mastered the art of making younger civilizations feel simultaneously welcomed and small. They arrived in our solar system with a flotilla of ships that made our best spacecraft look like paper airplanes, and they offered us a deal. The deal was standard. Every developing species got the same package. Basic faster-than-light theory, energy, conversion technology, material science that would let us build things we could not yet imagine. In exchange, we would join the Galactic economy as a contributing member. We would provide labor, goods, and services. We would pay a development fee over time, a kind of galactic mortgage that would cover the cost of our uplift. The interest rates were reasonable. The payment schedule was flexible. The whole thing was presented as an act of generosity, and in some ways it was. The Valori genuinely believed they were helping us. They had helped 100 species before. The pattern was always the same. You give the children tools, they use the tools. They grow up, they become productive members of society. Everyone benefits. What they did not expect was that we would take the tools apart. Every other species that had been uplifted followed the same path. They received the technology. They learned to operate it. They integrated it into their civilization and moved on. They used it the way you use a microwave. You press the buttons, the food gets hot. You do not ask why. Humans asked why. Within 5 years of receiving FTL theory, human physicists had not just understood the principles behind it, but had identified 3 inefficiencies in the standard Valori design and proposed corrections. Within 10 years, human engineers had redesigned the standard Council Transit drive to be 18% more fuel efficient. Within 15 years, we had developed our own variant that was faster, lighter, and more reliable than anything the Founding 14 had been using for centuries. This should have been alarming. It was not, because nobody was paying attention. You have to understand how the galactic economy worked. 312 species spread across thousands of star systems, producing goods and services on a scale that is difficult for a human mind to fully grasp. In that vast machine, humanity was a rounding error. Our entire economic output was less than what the Dralith spent on administrative supplies in a single fiscal quarter. We were small. We were new. And the things we produced, while excellent, were produced in quantities that barely registered on the galactic ledger. But the quality was noticed, not by the politicians, not by the diplomats, not by anyone who made decisions. It was noticed by the people who actually built things, the engineers and technicians, and fleet maintenance officers who worked with equipment every day and could feel the difference between a component that merely functioned and one that functioned beautifully. Word spread quietly. Human-built components lasted longer. Human-designed software had fewer errors. Human engineering teams delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. It was not a revolution, it was a reputation, and it grew the way reputations do, slowly. Through word of mouth, through the unglamorous channels of procurement. Officers comparing notes and logistics. Managers sharing data. The Dralith were the first of the Founding 14 to offer us a major contract. It was ironic in a way that I would only fully appreciate decades later. They needed a new class of patrol ships for their border systems, and their own shipyards were at capacity. They offered the contract to human yards because we were cheap, and because they had heard we did good The contract was not prestigious. It was the galactic equivalent of hiring a local shop to fix your car because the dealership was booked. We took the contract, we built the ships. The ships were flawless. More contracts followed. The Valori needed a communications relay station and subcontracted the fabrication to human orbital facilities. The Kethrin needed their aging freighter fleet refitted and found that human engineers could do the work at half the cost of their own yards with better results. One by one, the council species discovered what the maintenance officers had known for years. If you wanted something built right, you gave it to the humans. I grew up in the middle of all this. My father, George Holloway, was a structural engineer on the Helios orbital shipyards, a ring of interconnected stations orbiting Mercury, where humanity did the bulk of its off-world manufacturing. My mother, Catherine, managed supply logistics for the entire ring. I was born on Station 9 and took my first steps in low gravity. The hum of fabrication bays was my lullaby. The smell of superheated alloy was the smell of home. I want you to understand what Helios was like because it matters. It was not a factory, or rather it was a factory in the same way that a cathedral is a building. Yes, it had walls and a roof and a purpose, but it was also something more. 20,000 people lived and worked on the Helios ring. We built ships for species we had never met, species who would never know our names, species who would fly those ships across the galaxy without once thinking about the hands that had welded the whole plates or the minds that had written the navigation code, and we took pride in it. Fierce, stubborn, unreasonable pride, because that is what humans do. We pour ourselves into our work. We sign our names on the inside of the hull where no one will ever see them, because we know they are there, and that is enough. I became an engineer because I could not imagine being anything else. I studied at the Helios Technical Institute, apprenticed under a woman named Dr. Margaret Lane, and earned my certification at 23. By 30, I was supervising build teams for capital ships. By 34, I was chief engineer of the entire Helios ring, responsible for the construction and quality assurance of every vessel that rolled out of our yards. And here is the thing that no one outside of Earth seemed to notice. By the time I took that position, human shipyards were producing 74% of the combined fleet's total tonnage. Let me say that again, because I need you to understand the number. 74%. Nearly 3 out of every 4 warships, carriers, patrol craft, and support vessels in the Galactic Council's combined military force were built in human yards by human hands, running human-designed software. The Dralith's flagship, the Throne of Endless Stars, the largest and most powerful warship in the known galaxy, was built in Helios. Shipyard 7, I personally signed off on its reactor assembly. I knew that ship the way a mother knows her child. Every system, every circuit, every structural tolerance down to the micron. The other 26% were built by the species themselves, but even those ships ran on human-designed navigation systems and used human-sourced components for critical subsystems. 89% of the combined fleet used software written by human programmers. 6 of the founding 14's military logistics networks relied on human supply chains for maintenance, repair, and resupply. This was all public information. It was in the trade records, in the procurement databases, in the annual economic reports that the council published and that nobody read because they were 8,000 pages long and written in the densest bureaucratic language imaginable. Nobody noticed, nobody cared, because we were the furniture species. We were the useful ones who built things and kept quiet and did not cause trouble. They looked at our shipyards and saw a service provider. They looked at our engineers and saw skilled labor. They never, not once, looked at the big picture and asked themselves a very simple question: what happens if the furniture decides to stand up? Dr. Margaret Lane asked me that question once. It was late past midnight by station time. We were sitting in her office on Station 3, drinking terrible coffee from the cafeteria and reviewing schematics for a new Dralith destroyer class. She was 62 years old at the time, a small woman with gray hair that she kept cut short and hands that were permanently stained with the residue of conductive paste. She had been building ships since before I was born. She had forgotten more about starship engineering than most species would ever learn. She put down her coffee and looked at me with those sharp, dark eyes and said, "Grace, they gave us their engines so we would be useful. They never considered that we might become essential." I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I was 30 years old and still operating under the assumption that the galaxy was fundamentally fair, that if you worked hard and produced excellent results, you would be respected. I had not yet learned that respect and dependency are two very different things, and that the powerful do not respect the people they depend on, they resent them. I understand now. I understand because I was standing in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, watching 200 species vote to turn my people into property. And I knew with a certainty that went down to my bones that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of their civilization. Not because we were angry, not because we were dangerous, because we were essential. And they had forgotten that the most important rule of power is this: never ever put the people who build your weapons in a position where they have nothing left to lose. My earpiece crackled. A second message from General Cole, short and direct. Phase 1 is live, stall them. I straightened my jacket. I checked my data pad. I took one breath, held it and let it out slowly. Then I walked out of the human delegation's quarters, through the curved corridor that led to the grand chamber, past the security checkpoint staffed by Vellery guards who barely glanced at me, because I was human and therefore unimportant, and I stepped through the massive doors into the amphitheater, where my species had just been sold. The session was still technically open. Post-vote deliberations, procedural matters, the kind of bureaucratic housekeeping that most delegates used as an excuse to leave early. Half the chamber was already empty, but the Dralith were still there, and so were the other founding 14, and that was all that mattered. I walked to the speaker's platform. I pressed the request button. A small light appeared on the moderator's console indicating that a delegation wished to address the chamber. The moderator, a Pelvani elder with skin like cracked leather and eyes that had seen 10,000 sessions, looked at the light. Then she looked at me. I saw surprise in her expression. which was notable because the Pelvani were not a species given to visible emotion. A human was requesting the floor. This had never happened before. Not once in 40 years, she granted the request. Perhaps out of curiosity. Perhaps out of pity. Perhaps because she was old enough to know that history sometimes walks into a room wearing an unremarkable face. I stepped onto the platform. The holographic displays activated around me, projecting my image to every tier of the chamber. I could see myself on the screens. Human woman of average height with brown hair pulled back from her face and steady hands resting on the podium. I looked calm. I was calm. The numbness from earlier had been replaced by something else. Something sharper. Something that lived in the space between fear and certainty. I looked up at the tiers, at the green lights still glowing from the vote at the Dralith delegation, where Vorith Sen sat watching me with those black bottomless eyes, at the Urani section where Tolik Vey leaned forward in his seat, and I began to speak. Honored delegates, I said. My name is Grace Holloway. I am the acting representative of Earth. To this council, I am aware that my species has just been reassigned to vassal status under Resolution 7719. I do not intend to contest the legality of this resolution that got there. Attention, I could see it move through the chamber like a ripple on water. Surprise, confusion. A few delegates leaned toward their translators as if they had misheard. The Dralith High Delegate tilted his head slightly, which was the Dralith equivalent of raised eyebrows. He had expected me to cry, to beg, to deliver an emotional plea for mercy that he could graciously acknowledge before proceeding with the annexation of my species. That was how it always went. Every vassal species followed the same script: denial, anger, bargaining, resignation. I was not following the script. I have a question, I continued. A question of logistics. Before this resolution takes effect, I believe the Council would benefit from a brief review of certain operational data. With the High Delegate's permission, I would like to present this data now. Vorith Sen considered this for a moment. I watched his upper arm shift behind his back, the four fingers of each hand flexing in. What I had learned was a gesture of mild amusement. He thought this was entertaining. The small creature wanted to show some numbers before it accepted its fate. How charming. You may proceed, he said. Thank you. I tapped the podium controls. The holographic display shifted. The image of my face was replaced by something much more interesting, a map of the galaxy, and on that map every single warship in the Galactic Council's combined fleet, 14,312 vessels marked as points of light, scattered across the spiral arms. Destroyers, carriers, dreadnoughts, patrol ships, assault cruisers, support vessels, the largest military force in the known galaxy. The force that kept the peace, protected the borders, and ensured that the founding 14's authority was not just political but physical. The combined fleet, I said. 14,312 active vessels, the pride of the Galactic Council, the guarantor of order and stability. Across known space, I paused, let the image settle. Let them look at their fleet, their power, their teeth. My question is simple, I said. Who built these ships? Silence. Not the silence of thought. The silence of a room where no one has ever been asked a question they consider beneath them. I answered it myself. Let me show you, I said. I tapped the display again. The map changed. The points of light shifted color. Blue for ships built in human yards. White for ships built elsewhere. The transformation was immediate and devastating. The map turned blue. Not entirely, not perfectly, but overwhelmingly, undeniably, crushingly blue. Across the spiral arms, across the border systems, across the core worlds and the outer territories. The combined fleet lit up in the color of human construction, like a sky full of stars that all shared the same origin. 74%. I said 74% of the combined fleet was built in human shipyards, designed by human engineers, assembled by human hands. I began walking through the data, ship by ship, fleet by fleet, not rushing, not gloating, just presenting facts with the calm precision of an engineer delivering a quality report. The Dralith 1st Battle Group, 47 vessels, including the flagship Throne of Endless Stars, built at Helio shipyards 7 and 9. Human-designed reactor cores, human-written weapons targeting, software, human-engineered life support systems. I personally certified the reactor assembly on the flagship. I can tell you the serial number of every primary coupling in its drive system. Vorith's upper arm slowly unfolded from behind his back. Valori Defense Flotilla, 31 vessels, built at Helio Shipyard 12. The Valori provided the hull alloy. We designed and built everything else. The Valori delegate shifted in his seat. The Urani Collective's Border Patrol, 22 vessels, contracted to our series yards. The Kithra Rapid Response Fleet, 18 vessels, partially built in Kithra yards using human-supplied components and running on human navigational software. I kept going, fleet by fleet, name by name, number by number. I had the data memorized. I had been memorizing it for 7 months. Every night in my quarters, going over the figures the way a musician practices scales, not because I expected to use them, because I knew I might have to. The chamber was absolutely still. 1,000 species watching a single human woman stand at a podium and dismantle the assumption that had underpinned their entire civilizations. Relationship with my species. The assumption that we were small, that we were dependent, that we were interchangeable. But it is not just the ships, I said. 89% of the combined fleet runs on navigation software designed and maintained by human programmers. This software is updated quarterly. The updates come from Earth. If the updates stop, the software degrades. Within 6 months, navigational accuracy drops below safe operating thresholds. Within a year, the systems become unreliable. Within 18 months, they fail. I let that sit. 6 of the founding 14's military logistics networks depend on human supply chains for critical spare parts, maintenance materials, and technical support. If those supply chains are disrupted, fleet readiness begins to deteriorate within weeks. I looked at Vorith's, and his black eyes stared back at me. His forearms were at his sides now, and the fingers were no longer flexing with amusement. They were still, very, very still. You have voted, I said, to enslave the species that built your entire fleet. The chamber erupted, not in applause, in noise. 100. Translation fields firing at once. Delegates shouting to their aides. Communication devices buzzing with urgent transmissions. The moderator struck the session chime 3 times, calling for order. It took nearly a full minute before the chamber quieted. I waited. I was patient. I am an engineer. I understand that systems respond to inputs on their own schedule, and that the operator's job is not to force the pace but to apply the right input at the right time and let physics do the rest. When the chamber was silent again, I smiled. Not a wide smile. Not a grin. Not the kind of expression you make when you want someone to see your teeth. Just a small, quiet, certain smile. The smile of a woman who has spent her entire career building things that are stronger than they look and who knows exactly how much weight the beam can bear. Honored delegates, I said, you have 12 hours to reconsider Resolution 7719. I tapped my earpiece. Shall I tell you what happens if you do not? I did not wait for an answer. I stepped off the platform, walked down the central aisle, and left the grand chamber through the main doors. Behind me the noise rose again, louder this time, and I could hear individual voices cutting through the roar. Some were angry. Some were afraid. Some were both. I walked back to the human delegation's quarters. My team was waiting. Lucy had the communication array running at full capacity. Daniel had the legal files ready. Simon was monitoring fleet traffic across 12 sectors. They are talking, Lucy said. Let them talk, I said. They have 12 hours. And after 12 hours, Simon asked. I sat down at my console and entered the phase 1 authorization code. My finger hovered over the transmit key. After 12 hours, I said, we stop asking nicely. The first ship went dark at 14:07 Galactic Standard Time. It was a Dralith patrol cruiser called the Silent Authority, stationed on the border of Kethra space. One moment it was running at full operational status, engines hot, weapons ready, crew alert. The next moment its engines dropped to idle, its weapon systems went cold, and its navigation locked to 0. The ship did not explode. Nothing broke. Nothing caught fire. The crew was perfectly safe. They simply could not make the ship do anything. The captain of the Silent Authority, a Dralith officer named Reth Mazin, sent a distress signal 11 minutes later. Not because the ship was in danger, but because he could not figure out what had happened. His engineering team ran diagnostics. The diagnostics came back clean. Every system reported nominal status. Every component was functioning within specifications. The ship simply refused to accept commands from the crew. It was like sitting in a perfectly good car, turning the key and having the car politely inform you that it would rather not move. Today, by 14:30, it was not just the Silent Authority. I sat in our delegation's communications room and watched it happen in real time. On Lucy's display, green dots, representing active ships, turned amber. 1 by 1, then 2 by 2. Then in clusters, then in waves. It spread across the fleet like the sunrise moving across a planet. A slow, steady, unstoppable illumination. The Dralith Second Fleet. The Valori Home Guard. The Kethra Rapid Response Group. The Urani Border Patrol. Ship after ship after ship dropping to idle status, their crews confused, their captains frantic, their weapons useless. It was, and I say this with full awareness of what it means, beautiful. Not because I enjoyed the chaos, I did. Not. Every amber dot on that screen represented a ship with a crew living. Beings who had done nothing wrong. Who were not responsible for resolution. 7719. Who were simply soldiers doing their jobs. Some of them had probably voted against the resolution through their delegations. Some of them might have been kind, some of them might have been decent people, or whatever passed for decent in their species. And they were now sitting in ships that would not move, watching their instruments go blank, feeling the first cold edge of fear. I felt that, I carried it. I carry it still, but I also watched the numbers climb. 100 ships, 500, 1,000, 2,000, the green lights on Lucy's display going amber, like autumn leaves changing color, and I thought about what Vorith Sen had said. In the chamber, humane. He had called the enslavement of my species humane. He had used our word, our language, our concept of mercy, and applied it to the process of turning 8 billion human beings into property. So I watched the lights change, and I did not look away. At 15:00, approximately 1 hour after the first ship went dark, the Dralith High delegate requested an emergency audience with the human delegation. The request was formal, which meant it was serious. The Dralith did not make formal requests to species they considered beneath them. The fact that Vorith Sen was asking rather than commanding told me everything I needed to know about the state of his composure. I declined the request, not permanently, just for now. I sent a polite response through Lucy's console, thanking the High Delegate for his interest and informing him that the human delegation would be happy to meet with him at the conclusion of the 12-hour deliberation period. 15 minutes later, the Dralith sent a second request, less formal, more urgent. I declined again. 20 minutes after that, a request came, not from the Dralith, but from the council moderator herself, the Pelvani elder who had granted me the floor. She asked in the gentlest language I had ever received from an alien authority whether the human delegation would be willing to explain what was happening to the combined fleet. I said yes to her, because she had been kind, because she had let me speak when she did not have to, and because the Pelvani had voted against Resolution 7719. I met her in a neutral conference room on the Citadel's middle ring. Her name was Elder Sobai Thren, and she was even more imposing in person than she had been on the moderator's platform. The Pelvani were a terrestrial species, heavy-bodied and slow-moving, with thick gray skin and deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They lived for centuries. Sobai Thren was 412 years old. She had moderated the Galactic Council for 90 of those years. She had seen civilizations rise and fall and rise again. She looked at me the way you might look at a small animal that had just demonstrated it could open locks. Commander Holloway, she said. Her voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. What have you done? Nothing destructive, I said. I want to be very clear about that. No ship has been damaged. No crew member has been harmed. No system has been corrupted or sabotaged. Then what? I sat down across from her and placed my hands on the table. Every ship built in human yards include standard manufacturer, diagnostic, and Safety protocols. These protocols allow the manufacturer to initiate an emergency lockout in the event of certain predefined conditions. One of those conditions is the unlawful seizure of manufacturer assets or personnel. SOV. Thren's deep-set eyes narrowed. You are saying that Resolution 7719 triggered a contractual clause. I am saying that when the Council voted to seize every human being as property, it satisfied the legal definition of unlawful seizure of manufacturer personnel. The lockout protocols activated automatically. This was not entirely true. The protocols had not activated automatically. I had activated them manually using the authorization code that General Cole had given me. But the legal framework was real. The clause was real. It existed in every shipbuilding contract Earth had ever signed with the Council, buried in subsection 14, paragraph 9, in language so dense and tedious that no alien legal team had ever read it closely enough to understand what it actually meant. Because no one reads subsection 14. No one ever reads subsection 14. That is the whole point of subsection 14. SOV Thren was quiet for a long time. The Pelvani think slowly and carefully, and they do not speak until they have fully processed what they have heard. I respected that. I waited. How many ships? She asked finally. As of 10 minutes ago, approximately 10,600 out of 14,000. The remaining ships were not built in human yards or do not run critical human design systems. They are unaffected, but those ships represent less than 30% of the combined fleet's combat capability. 26%, I said. Yes. Another long silence. This is not a weapon, SOV Thren said. It was not a question, it was a statement. She was working through the logic, fitting the pieces together with the patient precision of a species that had been thinking carefully for 400 years. No, I said. It is a safety feature. Every manufacturer has the right to protect its products and its people. We are exercising that right, and if the Council rescinds Resolution 7719, then the safety concern is resolved. The lockout ends. Every ship returns to full operational status. No damage done, no lasting effects. It is as if it never happened, and if the Council does not rescind it, I met her eyes. Then 74% of the combined fleet remains locked down indefinitely. Every ship we have ever built, every system we maintain, every supply chain we operate, all of it stops. And I should tell you, Elder Thren, that the ships are only the beginning. 40 years is a long time. We have built a great many things. She studied me for a long moment, then she did something I did not expect. She laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound, like distant thunder, and it came from somewhere deep in her chest. 40 years. She said, you have been planning this for 40 years. Not planning, I said, preparing. There is a difference. We did not want this. We hoped it would never come to this. We built those ships with pride. We maintained those systems with care. We wanted to be partners. We wanted to be respected, but we are not foolish enough to build someone else's house and not keep a key. SOV Thren nodded. Slowly. I will speak to the Council, she said. I make no promises, but I will speak to them. That is all I ask. She stood. She was taller than me by nearly a meter, and she looked down at me with those ancient absorbing eyes. Commander Holloway, she said, I voted against the resolution. I know, I said. I counted. She left. I went back to our quarters and sat down at my console and stared at the display for a long time. The amber lights had stabilized. 10,482 ships locked down across the galaxy, 10,000 crews sitting in the dark waiting for instructions that would not come, wondering what had happened, wondering who had done this to them. Daniel came and sat beside me. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "No," I said, "I'm not all right. I just shut down 10,000 ships. There are supply convoys in that fleet." "Daniel, convoys carrying food and medical supplies to colony worlds. There are border patrols protecting systems from threats that do not care about council politics. People could get hurt because of what I did today. People were going to get hurt anyway." He said, 8 billion of them. "I know. That does not make this feel better. It is not supposed to feel better," he said. "It is supposed to work." He was right. He was absolutely right. And I hated him a little for it, and I hated myself a little for knowing it. And I sat there in our small, cramped quarters on a station the size of a moon, and felt the weight of what I had done settle onto my shoulders like a coat made of lead. The hours passed. Reports came in from across the galaxy. The Dralith High Command had declared a state of emergency. The Valori were convening their war council, though against whom they intended to wage war was unclear, since the threat was not military but mechanical. The Kethra ambassador had issued a public statement condemning both Resolution 7719 and the fleet lockdown, which was the diplomatic equivalent of throwing your hands up and walking away from the table. 3 smaller council species had already withdrawn their support for the resolution, citing changed circumstances. At hour 6, the Dralith sent a third request for a meeting. This time it was not from Voreth Sin. It was from the Dralith Supreme Chancellor, the head of their entire government, communicating via real-time quantum link from the Dralith homeworld. The message was brief. It asked with a politeness that bordered on desperation whether the human delegation would consider a preliminary discussion of terms. I sent back a single line: "We have stated our terms. We await your response." At hour 9, the Urani Collective formally withdrew its vote in favor of Resolution 7719 and called for its immediate repeal. Tolik Vi delivered the announcement, personally standing on the same platform where I had stood hours earlier. He spoke for 12 minutes. I listened to every word. He said that the Urani had made an error. He said that the Council had forgotten something important, that strength is not the same as dominance, and that a civilization's character is measured not by how it treats its equals, but by how it treats those it believes to be beneath it. He did not look at the Dralith when he said this. He did not have to. At hour 10, 4 more species changed their votes, then 6, then 11. At hour 11, the founding 14 held a closed-door emergency session. I was not present, but Lucy intercepted enough encrypted chatter to give us a general picture. The Dralith were arguing for military action. Somebody pointed out that this was difficult when 74% of your military could not move. The Valori were pushing for negotiation. The Pelvani, represented by Sovjethren, were pushing for immediate repeal. At hour 11:43, the Grand Chamber reconvened. Every delegation was present, every seat was filled. The observation galleries were packed. I had never seen the chamber so full. I stood at the human delegations position, which was a small section on the lowest tier, barely large enough for our team of 9. I could feel every eye in the chamber on me, 1,000 species, looking at a human woman in a plain gray jacket standing very still with her hands clasped in front of her. Voreth Sen took the podium. He did not look at me. He read a prepared statement in a voice that was flat and controlled and completely devoid of the confidence that had filled it 12 hours earlier. He announced that the Dralith hegemony, in consultation with the founding 14 and in response to the expressed concerns of the broader council community, had agreed to withdraw Resolution 7719. He further announced that the development debt cited in the resolution would be reclassified, voided, in recognition of the significant contributions made by Earth's industrial sector to the galactic economy over the preceding 4 decades. He paused. Chamber was silent. Every translator was working, but no one was speaking. Then he read the final item, a new provision to be added to the Council Charter. Article 77. No species, regardless of age, developmental status, or economic classification, could be sold, traded, transferred, or reassigned as property. The provision would apply retroactively to all existing agreements and would be binding on all current and future council members. He did not say that I had demanded this. He did not have to. Everyone in the chamber knew where Article 77 had come from. The vote was called. The lights appeared green, all green, every single delegation, 312 species, voting unanimously to enshrine the principle that people are not property. Even the Dralith voted yes. They had no choice. Their fleet was sitting in the dark. The moderator struck the session chime. Resolution 7719 was formally annulled. Article 77 was adopted. The chamber erupted in sound, a strange, complicated sound that was not quite celebration and not quite relief, but something in between. The sound of 1,000 civilizations exhaling at once. I transmitted the release code. Across the galaxy, 10,000 ships hummed back to life, engines spooled up, navigation systems reactivated, weapons when hot. Crews stared at their instruments as green lights replaced amber as systems came online one by one, as their ships remembered how to move. It was over, but it was not over. Not really. Not for me. The next 72 hours were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and administrative work that would have been mind-numbing under normal circumstances, but felt surreal in the aftermath of what had happened. There were treaties to revise, contracts to renegotiate, diplomatic channels to open that had never existed before. Humanity was no longer a provisional member of the Galactic Council. We were full members. We had voting rights. We had a real delegation, or we would as soon as Earth could send one. For now, it was still just me and my team of 8 sitting in our cramped quarters on the lower ring, conducting the most important diplomatic negotiations in human history while drinking bad coffee and sleeping in shifts. I should tell you about the conversations, not the official ones. Those were recorded and transcribed and would eventually fill hundreds of pages of current diplomatic archives. I mean, the unofficial ones, the ones that happened in corridors and cafeterias and observation lounges, the ones that no one wrote down but that mattered more than anything said on the chamber floor. HFY found me on the second day in the observation lounge on the Citadel's upper ring. It was a long curved room with a transparent wall that looked out on open space. From here you could see the Citadel's outer ring, a massive structure of dark metal and soft lights that stretched away into the distance, like a highway built among the stars. Beyond it, the galaxy itself, a wash of light and darkness that never failed to make me feel simultaneously tiny and infinite. I was standing at the window, drinking my coffee, trying to process the fact that 48 hours ago I had been an engineer, and now I was the most famous human being in the galaxy. The transition had not been smooth. Tolik approached quietly. The Irani moved with a fluid grace that made them look like they were always slightly underwater. He stood beside me at the window and said nothing for a while. "May I ask you something?" he said finally. "Yes, how long? How long have your people been planning for this?" I considered the question carefully. "Since the beginning," I said, "since the day we signed the first shipbuilding contract. Not because we expected betrayal, not because we thought the council would try to enslave us, but because we knew it was possible. That is a long time to prepare for something you hoped would never happen. We are a species that was raised on a world that tried to kill us every single day," I said. "Earthquakes, floods, disease, famine, ice ages, asteroid impacts. We survived all of it. Not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We survived because we learned very early to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. It is in our nature. We cannot help it." Tolik was quiet for a moment, then he said, "The lockout protocols, they were in the contracts all along. Subsection 14, paragraph 9. Standard Manufacturer Safety Clause. It is in every contract we have ever signed. No one read it. No one ever reads subsection 14." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Will the council ever trust your species again?" I thought about this. "Trust is for equals," I said. "You never trusted us. Before you did not notice us, now you do. Whether that becomes trust depends on what happens next. Trust is not a gift. It is built like a ship, one piece at a time, over years with care and precision, and the understanding that both parties have to do their part. You are still an engineer." He said, "I will always be an engineer." He extended one webbed hand. I took it. His grip was cool and firm, and his skin had the texture of smooth, wet leather. We shook hands in the human fashion, which he had clearly practiced because his technique was perfect. "The Urani will support Earth's full membership," he said formally, publicly, "for as long as it matters." "Thank you, Chalik. Do not thank me. I voted for the resolution before I voted against it. I changed my mind too late to matter. The least I can do is make sure my mistake counts for something." Going forward, he left. I stood at the window and watched the stars and thought. About what he had said. Too late to matter, he was wrong about that. Changing your mind is never too late. Because the act of changing it is not about the past, it is about the future. It is about the person you decide to be. From this moment forward, but I did not say that to him. Some truths need to be discovered on their own schedule. On the third day, I received a visitor I did not expect, a Velori diplomat named Edrin Tha, a senior member of their council delegation. The Velori were the species that had made first contact with humanity 40 years ago. They were the ones who had uplifted us, who had given us FTL technology and welcomed us into the Galactic community. They were also the ones who had voted yes on Resolution 7719. Edrin Tha was tall, like all Velori, with the iridescent skin that shifted from blue to violet as he moved. His eyes were large and golden, and they watched me with an expression I could not read. The Velori were difficult to read. Their emotional displays were color-based, tied to their skin, and the nuances were beyond human perception. He sat down in the chair across from my desk and folded his long hands in his lap. Commander Holloway, he said, I have come to ask a question that my government would prefer I did not ask. Ask it. Did you know when we uplifted your species, when we gave you our technology, did you know then? Did you plan this from the very beginning? I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. 40 years ago we were grateful. We were awed. We looked at your ships and your stations and your civilization, and we felt like children standing at the gates of a city built by giants. We took your gift and we said thank you. And we meant it. Then when did we start preparing? I do not know the exact date. It was gradual. It was 100 small decisions made by 100 different people over decades. The first engineer who noticed that the council species did not check their own ship software. First programmer who realized she could build a safety protocol into the navigation code without anyone noticing. The first general who looked at the procurement data and said, what if they turn on us? It was not a conspiracy. It was not a grand plan. It was instinct, the instinct of a species that has learned through millennia of hard experience that the people who control your survival will eventually try to control you. Edrin Tha's skin shifted to a deep dark blue. We did not mean to control you, he said. We meant to help. I believe you, I said, and I believe that you voted to sell us with the same sincerity. He flinched. It was a small movement, barely visible, but I saw it. His skin flashed violet, then settled back to blue. That is fair, he said quietly. That is fair. He stood to leave. At the door he turned back. The Velori made first contact with 107 species, he said. You are the first to do this, the first to prepare, the first to build our ships and build the locks, and wait for the day when the locks would be needed. That does not make me proud, I said. He said, but it makes you unique, and unique things are either very valuable or very dangerous. I am not yet sure which one you are. Neither am I said. He left that night alone in my quarters. I allowed myself to do something I had not done since the vote. I pulled up my private files. Not the Phase 1 protocols, not the fleet data, the other files, the ones that General Cole did not know about. The ones that nobody knew about except me and Dr. Margaret Lane and a very small number of engineers who had spent their careers building things that the galaxy took for granted. I scrolled through the files slowly. Each one represented a system, a network, and infrastructure element that humanity had designed, built, and maintained for the galactic community. Over 4 decades, communication relay networks, the backbone of Galactic telecommunications, 61% human, designed and maintained. If they went down, interstellar communication would degrade too. Lightspeed signals, messages between star systems would take years instead of seconds. Atmospheric processors, the machines that kept colony worlds habitable, 43% of all atmospheric processing equipment in council space was human manufactured. If the spare parts stopped coming, those machines would begin to fail within 2 years. Colony worlds would begin to lose breathable atmosphere within 5. Water purification systems, medical fabricators, agricultural automation, power grid management software, banking encryption protocols, transit station structural maintenance. 40 years of being useful. 40 years of being everywhere. Building everything, maintaining the invisible systems that 1,000 species depended on without thinking about them. The fleet lockout had been the loud part, the part they could see and understand, the alarm bell that woke them up. But the fleet was just one layer beneath it, woven into the fabric of galactic civilization like threads in a tapestry was everything else. Everything we had built, everything they could not replace. I had not told Sovi Thren about this. I had not told Vorithson. I had not told the council. The fleet lockout was a scalpel, a precise instrument designed to make a specific cut. These files were something else entirely. They were the knowledge that if things had gone differently, if the council had not backed down, if they had chosen to fight, humanity could have brought galactic civilization to its knees. Not through violence, not through weapons, but by simply stopping, by putting down their tools and walking away and letting the galaxy discover, one failing system at a time, just how much of its world had been built by the people it had tried to own. I would never use these files, I knew that. Fleet lockout had been enough. Article 77 had been passed. Humanity was free. The crisis was over, but I kept the files because some weapons are most effective when they are never used. Because the knowledge that you could bring down a civilization is its own kind of protection, and because I am an engineer, and engineers never throw away the blueprints. I closed the files. I leaned back in my chair. I stared at the ceiling of my small quarters and listened to the hum of the citadel around me, the low, constant vibration of a station powered by reactors that human technicians maintained and human engineers had optimized and human hands had built. My data pad chimed, a message from Earth, routed through the priority channel. I opened it. It was from Dr. Margaret Lane, 87 years old, still working, still in the shipyards, still drinking terrible coffee and signing off on reactor assemblies and training the next generation of engineers who would build things that were stronger than they looked. Her message was short. Proud of you, Grace. Now come home and help me fix these ships. We have a reputation to maintain. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I Had managed in days, and it came out. Rough and broken and unexpected, like water finding its way through a crack. A dam. I sat there in my quarters on a station, the size of a moon, surrounded by 1,000 alien civilizations that had just learned a very expensive lesson about the species they had considered furniture, and I laughed until my chest hurt. Then I wiped my eyes. I straightened my jacket. I sat down at my console and began drafting a message to General Cole, requesting transport back to Sol system. I had ships to build. It was, after all, what we do. Before I sent the message, I paused. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my console. Brown hair, tired eyes, a face that looked older than it had a week ago. I thought about Vor Athsen and his 4 arms and his certainty that he was entitled to own me. I thought about Tolek Ve and his webbed hand and his quiet shame. I thought about Sophie Thrain and her ancient eyes and her rumbling laugh. I thought about Edrin Thaw and his question whether we were valuable or dangerous. I thought about Dr. Lane, who had told me 20 years ago that they would never consider we might become essential. She had been right. They had never considered it. They had looked at us and seen a young, small, fragile species that was good with its hands and too naive to be a threat. They had given us their engines and their contracts and their casual contempt, and they had never once stopped to wonder what kind of people they were dealing with. We are the people who tamed fire, who split the atom, who launched ourselves into the void on pillars of controlled explosions and called it progress. We are the people who looked at a universe that was actively trying to end us and said, "Fine, we will build something that lasts." We are the people who put our names on the inside of the hull where nobody will ever see them because we know they are there, and that is enough. They voted to sell us. We smiled because we had already built the house they were living in. Every wall, every beam, every lock on every door. And we had kept the keys. I sent the message. I finished my coffee. I packed my bags. It was time to go home.